The obstacle is the way. This video is based on key insights from the book The Obstacle is the Way by Ryan Holiday. Introduction. Ryan Holiday begins by asking readers to consider the frustrating problems in their lives, the things that stop them from getting what they want. He suggests a different way to look at these problems. What if they weren't so bad? What if there were hidden benefits within them, benefits just for you? Most people, Holiday observes, get stuck and do nothing when faced with obstacles. They feel frozen, wishing things were different instead of trying to find a way forward. The author points out that obstacles come in two main forms: things happening in the world around us, like a tough economy or limited opportunities, and things happening inside us, like fear, lack of confidence, or feeling overwhelmed. But no matter what the obstacle is, the typical reaction is negative fear, frustration, anger, and a feeling of helplessness. It feels like an invisible force is holding us back, and we blame everything and everyone else for our struggles. Holiday argues that the real problem isn't the obstacles themselves, but our attitude towards them. He notes that many books tell us how to achieve success, but few teach us how to deal with failure or how to turn obstacles into opportunities. This is a crucial skill, he believes, because throughout history, some people have been able to do just that. They've used challenges as stepping stones to achieve great things. Holiday provides examples like John D. Rockefeller, who remained calm under pressure, and Abraham Lincoln, who showed humility and perseverance. These individuals, and others like Ulysses S. Grant, Thomas Edison, and Steve Jobs, faced incredible difficulties, but they didn't let those difficulties defeat them. Instead, they transformed them into strengths. Holiday explains that just as a crisis can destroy a weak company but improve a strong one, obstacles can make great people even greater. They take what holds others back and use it to fuel their ambition. He connects this ability to the ancient philosophy of Stoicism, a way of thinking that emphasizes self-control, reason, and acceptance of what we cannot change. Stoic thinkers like Marcus Aurelius understood that obstacles are inevitable, but they believed we can choose how we respond to them. The author clarifies that this isn't about pretending everything is okay or ignoring problems. It's about actively looking for the good in bad situations, finding opportunities for growth, and using challenges to become stronger. He uses a Zen story about a king who placed a boulder in the road to test his people. Most turned away, but one peasant used his ingenuity to move the rock and discovered a reward hidden beneath it. This story illustrates the idea that the obstacle itself can be the path to something better. Holiday acknowledges that many modern obstacles are internal things like self-doubt, lack of motivation, and the distractions of a comfortable life. But the principle remains the same. We can turn these internal struggles into opportunities for self-improvement. He proposes a three-step process for overcoming obstacles: perception, action, and will. Perception is about how we see the problem, action is about taking steps to address it, and will is about maintaining the inner strength to persevere through difficulties. He emphasizes that this process isn't easy, but it's a powerful way to transform obstacles into advantages and become the person we are meant to be. Ultimately, Holiday encourages readers to embrace challenges, learn from them, and use them to achieve their goals. Part 1: Perception. Ryan Holiday begins by explaining that how we see the world, our perception, is incredibly powerful. It can either help us succeed or hold us back. If we let our emotions control us, if we jump to conclusions, or if we only focus on the short term, we'll likely make things harder on ourselves. He draws on ancient wisdom, suggesting we need to learn to control our feelings, just like people did long ago. It's about being able to tell what's real from what's not, to ignore our biases and fears, and to see things clearly. When we can do that, we find truth, and that gives us a huge advantage when facing challenges. To illustrate this, Holiday tells the story of John D. Rockefeller. Rockefeller didn't start as a wealthy oil tycoon. He began as a bookkeeper, a regular guy working for 50 cents a day. Then, a major financial crisis hit in 1857. Many people panicked, but Rockefeller didn't. Instead of running away, he observed what was happening, learning from the mistakes of others. He realized the market was unpredictable and that only those who were rational and disciplined could succeed. He saved his money and waited for the right opportunity. This shows how important it is to stay calm and think clearly, even when things are chaotic. This discipline continued throughout Rockefeller's life. When offered a chance to invest in oil wells, he didn't jump at the first opportunity. He waited until he found the right opportunity, even if it meant missing out on what everyone else was excited about. He didn't let greed or excitement cloud his judgment. He repeated this pattern through multiple economic crises, always seeing opportunities where others saw disaster. Rockefeller understood that the more chaos there was, the calmer he needed to be. He made his fortune by seeing what others couldn't, by resisting impulsive decisions and sticking to common sense. Holliday points out that Rockefeller wasn't perfect, but his ability to perceive situations differently was key to his success. He was adaptable, resilient, and never rattled by setbacks. He could see through illusions and focus on what truly mattered. Rockefeller didn't just build a business empire. He mastered self-control, which allowed him to navigate a turbulent world. This self-mastery, Holliday notes, is the true wealth, as the Stoics believed. It's about controlling yourself, not just controlling your surroundings. The author then introduces Reuben "Hurricane" Carter, a boxer wrongly convicted of murder. Carter faced an incredibly difficult situation, but he refused to let it break him. He understood that while his physical freedom was taken away, his inner freedom, his thoughts, beliefs, and choices remained. He chose not to be treated like a victim. He focused on his legal case, educating himself and maintaining his dignity. Carter's story demonstrates that even in the most hopeless circumstances, we always have a choice about how we respond. We can choose to give up, or we can choose to maintain control of our own minds. Holliday emphasizes that we all have this power. We decide how we interpret events. A situation isn't inherently good or bad. It's our perception that makes it so. We can choose to see obstacles as opportunities or as insurmountable problems. This is a powerful idea because it puts us in control. We aren't simply victims of circumstance. We are active participants in shaping our own reality. Finally, Holliday stresses the importance of nerve control, drawing on the example of Ulysses S. Grant, who remained remarkably calm under fire during the Civil War. Grant's father intentionally exposed him to frightening situations as a child to build his resilience. Holliday explains that when we're under pressure, we need to be able to stay steady, to not let our emotions overwhelm us. It's about defiance, refusing to be intimidated, and acceptance, recognizing that challenges are inevitable. It's about preparing for the worst, but facing it with a cool head. When we can control our nerves, we can think clearly and make the right decisions, even in the midst of chaos. Ryan Holiday begins by sharing a story about the first American astronauts. He explains that NASA didn't just train them in science and flying, but in how to stay calm. When people panic, they make mistakes. They forget procedures and stop thinking clearly. This is true not just in space, but in everyday life. We often have plans that fall apart, and our first reaction is to freak out instead of dealing with the problem. The author points out that panic can be deadly for astronauts, but it's also harmful for us on Earth. To prepare the astronauts, NASA recreated every part of the space mission over and over again. They wanted the experience to become so familiar that it felt natural, reducing fear and uncertainty. This highlights a key idea. Training builds confidence and helps us handle stress. It's about removing the unknown, because unfamiliarity is often what scares us the most. Holiday uses the example of John Glenn, the first American to orbit Earth, who kept his heart rate steady even in space. Glenn wasn't just controlling the spaceship, he was controlling his emotions. Holiday contrasts the astronaut's calm with how many people react to everyday challenges. A simple conversation can cause anxiety, or public speaking can be terrifying. He argues that getting upset is a waste of energy. In space, a small mistake could be fatal, so emotional control was essential. The same is true in life. Obstacles are inevitable, but how we respond to them determines our success. The author introduces the Greek concept of apatheia and ataraxia, which means stillness and freedom from disturbance. It's not about losing feelings, but about avoiding harmful, unhelpful emotions. The author explains that if an emotion doesn't help solve a problem, it's probably making things worse. He encourages readers to ask themselves if getting upset actually provides more options. Usually, it doesn't. It's okay to feel emotions, but it's important not to let them control us. Real strength comes from managing our emotions, not pretending they don't exist. Holiday suggests reminding ourselves, I am in control, not my emotions. He proposes using logic to challenge negative thoughts. For example, if you lose money, ask yourself if losses are common in business, if this loss is catastrophic, and if it was unexpected. This process can help calm your emotions and focus on solutions. Holiday then introduces the idea of objectivity, drawing from the teachings of the samurai swordsman Miyamoto Musashi. Musashi distinguished between observing and perceiving. The observing eye simply sees what is, while the perceiving eye adds judgments and interpretations. The author explains that our brains often rush to judgment, compressing the space between seeing something and reacting to it. This can lead to mistakes. To improve objectivity, Holiday suggests practicing what he calls contemptuous expressions. This involves looking at things without emotional attachment, seeing them for what they truly are. For example, imagining a powerful person in a mundane situation, or describing expensive items in simple terms. The author emphasizes that objectivity means removing you from the equation. When we give advice to others, we're usually objective and can see solutions clearly. But when we face our own problems, we get caught up in our emotions. Holiday suggests pretending a problem isn't happening to you, or that it doesn't matter. This can create distance and allow you to see the situation more clearly. He encourages readers to practice this skill regularly, as it takes effort to develop. Finally, Holiday discusses the importance of perspective. He shares the story of Athenian general Pericles, who calmed his panicked fleet during a solar eclipse by showing them a cloak and asking if they were afraid of it. The point was that the cause of the darkness didn't matter, it was how they reacted to it. The author explains that we often choose the most negative explanation for events, which can be harmful. Shifting our perspective can change our reaction entirely. He uses the example of George Clooney, who changed his approach to auditions by realizing that he was offering a solution to the casting director's problem. Holiday concludes that we have the freedom to choose how we look at things, and that the right perspective can make even the most daunting obstacles seem manageable. He references the Serenity Prayer and the Stoic phrase, ta ephemin, ta auk ephemin, which means what is up to us, what is not up to us. We should focus our energy on what we can control, our emotions, judgments, and actions, and accept what we cannot. Ryan Holiday explores how focusing on what you can control, a key idea from Stoicism, can actually help you succeed in life and work. He starts by pointing out a surprising pattern. Many successful businesses were started during tough economic times. Companies like FedEx, Disney, and Microsoft didn't wait for perfect conditions. They started and grew because of the challenges around them. Holiday explains that these founders were too busy dealing with the immediate problems to worry about the big picture, or whether things would get better. They just focused on what they could do right now, meeting payroll, selling a product, building something useful. The author argues that we often get in our own way by overthinking. We spend too much time worrying about what things mean, whether they're fair or what others are doing. This takes energy away from actually solving problems. Holiday uses the example of Steve Jobs and his reality distortion field. Jobs didn't accept "it can't be done" as an answer. He believed that with enough vision and hard work, almost anything was possible. He pushed his teams to achieve things others thought were impossible, like creating a mouse that moved smoothly in any direction. This wasn't about being unrealistic, but about refusing to accept limitations without a fight. Holiday emphasizes that our perceptions shape our reality. If we believe an obstacle is insurmountable, it probably will be. But if we see it as a challenge to overcome, we're more likely to succeed. He uses the example of General Eisenhower during World War II. When faced with a massive German counteroffensive, Eisenhower didn't panic. He reframed the situation as an opportunity for the Allies to defeat the enemy. He told his generals to be cheerful, and they were able to see that the German attack, while powerful, had weaknesses that could be exploited. The author explains that often, what looks like a disaster actually contains hidden benefits. A bad boss can be an opportunity to develop new skills. A rival can motivate you to improve. Even a computer crash can be a chance to start fresh. Holiday draws on the idea of adversarial growth, the idea that struggling with challenges can actually make us stronger and more resilient. He points to Socrates, who said having a difficult wife was good practice for philosophy. The key, Holiday says, is to look beyond the surface and find the opportunity within the obstacle. Finally, Holiday stresses the importance of action. Seeing the opportunity is only the first step. You have to be willing to do something about it. He encourages readers to be bold, to calculate the risks, and to act even when things are difficult. He uses a quote from Shakespeare about stiffening the sinews and summoning the blood, preparing yourself for action. The author concludes that success isn't about avoiding problems, but about facing them with a clear head and a willingness to act. It's about recognizing that the worst thing that can happen isn't the obstacle itself, but letting it defeat you. Part 2, Action. Ryan Holiday presents a powerful idea. True success isn't about grand plans or luck, but about consistent action. He argues that simply doing something is common, but right action that serves a larger purpose is rare. It's not enough to be busy. We must be deliberately working towards our goals, step by step, adapting as we go. This requires courage, not recklessness, and clever thinking, not just brute force. Our choices define us, so we need to act thoughtfully, boldly, and with unwavering determination. Holiday illustrates this with the story of Demosthenes, a young boy who overcame a speech impediment and a difficult childhood to become one of history's greatest speakers. Demosthenes wasn't naturally gifted. He faced numerous obstacles. His inheritance was stolen, and he was physically weak and ridiculed. But instead of giving up, he actively worked to improve himself. He practiced speaking with pebbles in his mouth, rehearsed while running, and even shaved half his head to force himself to stay focused on his studies. He didn't wait for things to get easier. He made them easier through relentless effort. This demonstrates that our circumstances don't determine our fate, our response to them does. The author emphasizes that action isn't just a solution, it's the only solution. Thinking, hoping, or waiting for help won't solve our problems. We must take responsibility and actively work towards our goals. Holiday points out how easily we fall into patterns of avoidance, complaining, distracting ourselves, or simply waiting for things to get better. But these actions don't lead to improvement, they only prolong the problem. He challenges readers to ask themselves, when faced with a challenge, do they run towards it or away from it? Do they act or do they become paralyzed? Holiday draws a parallel to our natural instincts. When we trip, we automatically extend our hands to protect ourselves. We don't think about it, we just react. He argues that we should approach life's challenges with the same instinctual drive. We possess a hidden strength, but we often fail to tap into it. Instead of articulating problems and then doing nothing, we need to channel our energy into finding solutions. He uses the analogy of turning shit into sugar, highlighting that people have overcome far greater obstacles than we often face. They didn't quit, they didn't feel sorry for themselves, and they didn't wait for easy solutions. They focused on applying themselves creatively and persistently. The author stresses the importance of persistence. He uses the example of General Ulysses S. Grant's relentless siege of Vicksburg during the Civil War. Grant faced repeated failures and criticism, but he refused to give up. He tried different strategies, adapted to changing circumstances, and ultimately found a way to break through the Confederate defenses. Grant's story illustrates that success often comes not from a single brilliant idea, but from a willingness to keep trying, even when things seem hopeless. Similarly, Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb wasn't a sudden breakthrough. It was the result of thousands of failed experiments. Edison's genius lay in his persistence, his ability to learn from his mistakes and keep moving forward. Holiday encourages readers to embrace a mindset of unwavering determination. He suggests adopting the attitude of never in a hurry, never worried, never desperate, never stopping short. This means approaching challenges with patience, resilience, and a commitment to seeing things through to the end. It's about recognizing that obstacles are inevitable, but they can be overcome with consistent effort. He uses the quote from Theodore Roosevelt, "We must all either wear out or rust out, every one of us. My choice is to wear out," to emphasize the importance of actively engaging with life's challenges rather than passively letting them consume us. Finally, Holiday shares the story of Amelia Earhart, who took a risky and unconventional opportunity to pursue her dream of becoming an aviator. Despite facing discrimination and limited opportunities, she seized the chance to fly across the Atlantic, even though she wasn't the primary pilot and wouldn't receive equal pay. Earhart's willingness to start, even under unfavorable conditions, paved the way for her future success. Holiday concludes by urging readers to stop waiting for the perfect moment and to start taking action now. He reminds us that the time for hesitation is over, the wind is rising, and it's time to get moving. Ryan Holiday explores how ancient wisdom from Stoicism can help people succeed in modern life. He begins by sharing a quote from Wendell Phillips, reminding us that even failures can be valuable lessons, stepping stones to something better. The author uses the example of Silicon Valley startups, which don't launch with perfect products. Instead, they release a minimum viable product, or MVP, a basic version to test what customers want. This allows them to fail quickly and cheaply, avoiding wasted effort on things people won't buy. Holiday points out that in engineering, failure isn't seen as a bad thing, but as a necessary part of improvement. The author explains that Stoicism encourages a similar mindset. It's not about avoiding failure, but about learning from it. Each setback provides new options and opportunities. He contrasts this with the old way of doing business, where companies tried to guess what customers wanted in secret, risking huge losses if their product flopped. The MVP model and Stoicism embrace feedback and adapt. Holiday suggests we can apply this to our own lives, treating ourselves like a startup of one, constantly iterating, trying, failing, and improving. He emphasizes that action and failure go hand in hand. Stopping action is what truly hinders progress. Holiday encourages readers to ask themselves what went wrong and what can be improved after a failure. This helps find better solutions. He shares stories of success, often following significant failures, like a sports team learning from a close loss. Scientists aren't upset when a hypothesis is wrong, because that's how they learn. Similarly, we shouldn't take failure personally, but as a natural part of the process. Successful entrepreneurs, according to Holiday, aren't afraid to lose a little, aren't bitter when things go wrong, and don't stay down for long. They keep trying. The author acknowledges that failure hurts, but argues that anticipated, temporary failure is better than a catastrophic, permanent one. Learning has a cost, discomfort, or loss, but it's a worthwhile investment. He uses the analogy of a ship captain learning where the rocks are by bumping into them, highlighting that sometimes we learn through experience, even if it's painful. Holiday then shares a historical example from World War II, where the Allies intentionally fought the Germans in North Africa, knowing they would likely lose. This allowed them to learn valuable lessons before facing the Germans in Europe, ultimately contributing to victory. Holiday stresses that ignoring the lessons from failure is the biggest mistake. He describes people who repeat the same errors, unwilling to change, as being thick-headed and out of touch. He emphasizes that the world is constantly giving us feedback, trying to teach us, and we need to listen. He encourages readers to strive for improvement each day, becoming farther along, better off, smarter, more able. He concludes that failure reveals what doesn't work, guiding us toward better solutions. The author then transitions to discussing the importance of the process, referencing football coach Nick Saban. Saban doesn't focus on winning, but on doing the small things right, focusing on the current task, not the ultimate goal. Holiday explains that breaking down large goals into smaller steps makes them manageable. Excellence is achieved through consistently excelling at each individual step. He uses the example of a difficult task being broken down into 7-second intervals, emphasizing the importance of focusing on the present moment. This approach applies to all areas of life, from surviving a difficult ordeal to pursuing a long-term goal. Holiday shares the story of James Pollard, a spy, who learned to read and write by focusing on one letter at a time. This illustrates the power of breaking down a seemingly impossible task into smaller, achievable steps. He quotes Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, who said that well-being is achieved through small steps. The author uses the analogy of being pinned to the ground, explaining that panicking and using brute force won't work. Instead, focusing on small, deliberate actions, creating space, getting on your side will eventually lead to freedom. He cautions against getting distracted by grand visions and instead focusing on the immediate task at hand. Holiday emphasizes the importance of doing your job well, regardless of how glamorous or important it seems. He shares stories of Andrew Johnson and James Garfield, both presidents who took pride in their humble beginnings and always did their work with dedication. He argues that every task, no matter how small, is an opportunity to excel and learn. He stresses that we should approach our work with hard work, honesty, and a desire to help others. He uses the example of Steve Jobs, who cared about the details of his products, even those unseen by customers, to illustrate the importance of craftsmanship. The author concludes by highlighting the Stoic idea that life is constantly asking us questions through our experiences, and our actions are the answers. By doing our best, we demonstrate that we matter and that life is meaningful. He encourages readers to focus on the present moment, to do the right things, and to trust in the process, ultimately leading to a more fulfilling and successful life. He ends with a quote from Marcus Aurelius, reminding us to discard what is useless, like a bitter cucumber, and find a way around obstacles, like brambles in the path. Ryan Holiday explores the idea that winning isn't always about direct confrontation, but often about cleverness and finding unexpected routes to success. He starts by looking at George Washington, who wasn't a typical, bold general. Instead, Washington was smart and avoided big battles when he could. His army was weak, so he used hit-and-run tactics, always trying to outsmart the stronger British army. Washington understood that a direct fight would likely mean losing, so he focused on tiring out the enemy and choosing battles where he had the best chance of success, even if those battles seemed small. Holiday points out that history often exaggerates the stories of great leaders, making them seem more heroic than they really were. He shares a study showing that direct attacks on the enemy's main force are rarely the reason wars are won, only about 2% of the time. This means that most victories come from being sneaky, surprising the enemy, or attacking their weaknesses. The author uses the example of a brilliant strategist, B.H. Liddell Hart, who believed that successful leaders are willing to take unusual paths, even if it means facing difficult conditions, to avoid a stalemate. The author encourages readers to think differently about challenges. Instead of always trying to overpower an obstacle, he suggests finding a way around it. He uses the example of Grant bypassing Vicksburg instead of directly attacking it, and Phil Jackson's triangle offense in basketball, which avoids direct confrontation with the defense. When facing a tough problem, Holiday advises stepping back and looking for a line of least expectation, something no one else is trying. It's about finding a unique solution that others haven't considered. Holiday explains that often, those who seem most skilled at something actually exert less effort. They've learned to use their energy efficiently, focusing only on what truly matters. He shares a story about Jigoro Kano, the founder of judo, who was so skilled that fighting him felt like fighting an empty jacket. This illustrates the idea that mastery isn't about brute force, but about technique and knowing where to apply your energy. Being under-resourced, behind, or lacking funds shouldn't be seen as disadvantages, but as opportunities to be creative and find unconventional solutions. The author then introduces the concept of using obstacles to your advantage. He references Gandhi and Martin Luther King Jr., who didn't fight with violence, but instead used nonviolent resistance to expose the injustice of their opponents. They allowed their enemies to reveal their own weaknesses. This idea is further illustrated with the example of Russians defeating Napoleon and the Nazis by retreating and letting the harsh winter defeat the invaders. Holiday emphasizes that sometimes the most effective action is inaction, letting the obstacle work against itself. He uses the analogy of a boat using another boat's downstream momentum to slingshot itself upstream. Holiday highlights the importance of channeling your energy. He uses the example of Arthur Ashe, the tennis player who masked his emotions on the court, but channeled that energy into his powerful playing style. Ashe's ability to control his emotions allowed him to stay focused and perform at his best. Similarly, Julia Baird, a writer, found strength in her difficult times by drawing on all the experiences and lessons she had learned throughout her life. The author suggests that when faced with adversity, we should look for ways to use it to our advantage, turning negatives into positives. Finally, Ryan Holiday stresses the importance of being prepared for failure. He acknowledges that even with careful planning and effort, things don't always go as expected. He encourages readers to embrace the idea that sometimes the best course of action is to accept defeat and move on. He emphasizes that the ability to try your best and then accept the outcome is a sign of strength and resilience. It's about focusing on the effort, not just the result, and recognizing that every challenge is an opportunity to learn and grow. Part 3. Will. Ryan Holiday explains that success isn't just about having good ideas or working hard. It's about having a strong will. He believes will is an inner power that can't be shaken by what happens around you. It's about deciding how you'll react to tough situations and finding a way to grow from them, even if it's just learning something new or being there for others. But this strength doesn't just appear, it needs to be built up over time. Like training for a sport, you need to prepare for challenges and practice staying positive even when things are hard. Holiday points out that people often think will is simply wanting something badly, but it's also about accepting what you can't change. He suggests saying, God willing, instead of the will to win, because even strong desires can be broken. True strength, he argues, comes from being humble, resilient, and flexible. It's different from being stubborn or overly ambitious, which can crumble under pressure. He uses Abraham Lincoln as a prime example. Most people only remember Lincoln as a great leader, but Holiday reveals that he struggled with deep depression throughout his life. Lincoln faced many hardships: poverty, a difficult father, the death of his mother, losing the woman he loved, and repeated political defeats. Yet, he didn't let these things defeat him. Instead, he learned from them and used his experiences to become a more compassionate and effective leader. He believed his struggles prepared him for greater things and was frustrated that most biographies of successful people glossed over their failures. He understood that it's the obstacles, not the easy times, that truly shape us. During the Civil War, a time of immense national crisis, Lincoln's ability to remain calm, patient, and focused was crucial. He wasn't driven by anger or a desire for revenge, but by a commitment to doing what was right, even when it was difficult. Holiday emphasizes that Lincoln's strength wasn't just intelligence or ambition, but his will, his ability to accept a difficult task without losing hope, to find humor even in dark times, and to use his own pain to help others. Lincoln often said, "This too shall pass," recognizing that all things are temporary. He built an inner fortress that allowed him to endure the immense pressure of the war. The author explains that will is the discipline of the heart and soul, different from the disciplines of the mind, perception, and body action. While you can try to control your thoughts and actions, your will is something you always control. Holiday uses the example of Theodore Roosevelt to illustrate how will can be developed. Roosevelt overcame severe asthma as a child by relentlessly working to strengthen his body. He didn't just hope to get better, he actively took steps to improve his physical health. This early training prepared him for the many challenges he faced later in life, including personal tragedies and political battles. The author argues that we often take our weaknesses for granted, assuming they are permanent. But just like Roosevelt, we can actively work to overcome our limitations and build inner strength. Holiday draws a parallel to the ancient philosophers and the Jewish tradition of remembering the Exodus. Both emphasize the importance of mental and spiritual preparation. The Stoics believed in building an inner citadel, a fortress within ourselves that can't be broken by external forces. The Jewish tradition of retelling the story of the Exodus serves as a reminder of past struggles and the strength needed to overcome adversity. The author concludes that life will inevitably present challenges, and the key to success is not avoiding those challenges, but preparing for them. Building your will is like strengthening an arch. It requires putting yourself under pressure, but it's the tension that makes it strong. It's about accepting that you can't control everything, but you can control how you respond to it. Ryan Holiday presents a powerful idea. Success isn't about avoiding problems, it's about preparing for them and even welcoming them. He begins by referencing Seneca, a Roman philosopher who believed in facing hardship with courage, not trusting in good luck, and understanding that life is unpredictable. Seneca's advice is simple: be ready for anything. Holiday illustrates this with a story of a CEO who, before launching a big project, held a pre-mortem meeting. Instead of asking what went right, she asked her team what went wrong before anything even happened. This exercise, inspired by psychologist Gary Klein, forces people to think about potential failures and create backup plans. It's about being realistic, not pessimistic. Holiday explains that we often fool ourselves into thinking things will go smoothly, and we're shocked when they don't. He uses Mike Tyson as an example, someone who lost his fortune and fame and realized the importance of humility. Tyson's story shows that expecting the worst can actually prepare you for it. The author points to historical events like the tech bubble, 9/11, and the pandemic as examples of times when a lack of preparation led to disaster. He emphasizes that the Stoics, ancient philosophers, practiced this idea long ago, calling it premeditation of evils. They would mentally rehearse potential problems, storms at sea, hostile audiences, failed policies, so they wouldn't be caught off guard. Seneca believed that a wise person isn't surprised by misfortune because they've already considered it. According to Holiday, the key is anticipation. It's about acknowledging that things will go wrong and then figuring out how to deal with it. He encourages readers to ask, what if questions and develop responses. What if this fails? Then I will, or instead I'll just. This isn't about being negative, it's about being prepared. The author stresses that sometimes, the best response to a problem is simply accepting that it's going to be difficult and enduring it. He highlights that life isn't fair, promises are broken, and things rarely go as planned. He uses the inscription at the Oracle of Delphi, offer a guarantee and disaster threatens, to illustrate this point. Holiday then introduces the concept of amor fati, a Latin phrase meaning love of fate. He tells the story of Ernest Hemingway, whose manuscripts were lost on a train. While devastating at the time, this loss forced him to reinvent his writing style and ultimately contributed to his success. The author uses the example of Tony Hawk, the skateboarder, who overcame his small size by inventing a new trick. Both stories demonstrate that constraints can lead to innovation. Holiday explains that accepting what we can't control, like a diagnosis from a doctor or a traffic jam, is crucial. It's not about giving up, but about focusing our energy on what we can control, our response. The author emphasizes that resisting fate is futile. He uses the analogy of fighting gravity or the sunset. It's a waste of energy. Instead, we should adapt and find a way to work with the situation. He points to George Washington and Dwight D. Eisenhower, both leaders who acknowledged the role of fate in their endeavors. Holiday encourages readers to embrace the idea that life is unpredictable and to be prepared for anything. He concludes by suggesting that loving everything that happens, even the bad things, is the key to resilience and ultimately success. It's about finding opportunity in adversity and facing challenges with cheerfulness and determination. Ryan Holiday explores how facing challenges with a calm and determined spirit, a core idea from Stoicism, can actually lead to greater success in life. He begins by quoting Gene Webster, who points out that it takes real strength to handle everyday annoyances with a good attitude, not just big crises. This sets the stage for his exploration of perseverance, a quality he illustrates through the epic journey of Odysseus. Holiday explains that Odysseus wasn't just brave during battles, but also during the long, frustrating years trying to get home. It wasn't just about courage or cleverness, but about consistently moving forward, even when things got tough. He contrasts perseverance with persistence, explaining that persistence is about hammering at one problem until it breaks, while perseverance is about enduring through many rounds of challenges, adjusting as needed, and never giving up on the overall goal. Think of it like this. Persistence is trying to open a locked door with the same key over and over, while perseverance is finding a different key, picking the lock, or even building a new door if necessary. The author uses examples like Queen Elizabeth II's decades of dedicated service and Ulysses S. Grant's struggles with poverty, war, and financial ruin to show that perseverance isn't about avoiding hardship, but about facing it with unwavering resolve. He introduces the German word Sitzfleisch, which literally means sitting flesh, to describe the staying power needed to win by simply refusing to quit. Holiday emphasizes that life isn't about one big obstacle, but a series of them, and that a determined mindset is essential to overcome them all. He highlights the importance of will over mere energy, explaining that perseverance is about endurance, not just initial effort. He references Tennyson's line about being strong in will to strive, seek, find, and not yield, emphasizing the need to both persist and resist. The author argues that throughout history, perseverance has been a more effective strategy than technology, violence, or new ideas. He points to Magellan, who succeeded not because of his sailing skills, but because he could endure hunger, cold, and loneliness better than his crew. Holiday notes that a lack of perseverance is often the reason for failure, not external events. He criticizes a modern tendency to give up easily when things don't go as planned, contrasting it with the resilience of past generations. He uses the example of someone trying multiple professions until they find success, like a cat always landing on its feet, to illustrate this point. He stresses that true perseverance is unstoppable, except by death itself. The author then shifts to the idea of focusing on something bigger than oneself. He tells the story of James Stockdale, a Navy fighter pilot held captive in Vietnam, who found strength not in self-preservation, but in his duty to lead and support his fellow prisoners. Stockdale established a system of unity and support, reminding his men that they were in it together. This concept, unity over self, helped them endure unimaginable hardship. Holiday connects this to current economic struggles, arguing that focusing on helping others can diminish personal fears and provide a sense of purpose. Holiday suggests that we often get caught up in I thinking, which leads to feelings of helplessness and isolation. He encourages readers to shift their focus to contributing to something larger than themselves, finding strength in shared purpose. He emphasizes that everyone faces challenges, and that helping others can be a powerful way to overcome our own. He reminds us that we are part of a long chain of humanity, and that our struggles are not unique. Finally, Ryan Holiday argues that meditating on our mortality can actually be empowering. He uses the example of Mitchell de Montaigne, who found renewed purpose after a near-death experience. He explains that acknowledging our limited time on Earth can help us prioritize what truly matters and live with greater urgency and appreciation. He suggests that death is the one obstacle we cannot avoid. but that accepting it can free us from fear and allow us to focus on living a meaningful life. He concludes by emphasizing that while we can't control the obstacles we face, we can control our response to them, and that determination is invincible. Final thoughts: the obstacle becomes the way. Ryan Holiday closes his book with a powerful message about how facing challenges can actually lead to success, drawing heavily from the life and teachings of Marcus Aurelius. He illustrates this idea by recounting a difficult time in the Roman emperor's life, a rebellion led by a trusted general, Avidius Cassius. Instead of reacting with anger or seeking revenge, Marcus Aurelius chose a different path. He paused, considered the situation, and decided to respond with forgiveness, even hoping to reason with his betrayer. This wasn't weakness, Holiday explains, but a demonstration of Stoic principles in action. The author emphasizes that Stoicism isn't about being passive or accepting defeat. It's about understanding that we can't control everything that happens to us, but we can control how we react. Marcus Aurelius's response to Cassius's rebellion shows this perfectly. He focused on what he could control, protecting the empire and responding with virtue, rather than dwelling on what he couldn't, the betrayal itself. Even when Cassius was unexpectedly killed by an assassin, Marcus didn't seize the opportunity for retribution. Instead, he extended forgiveness to everyone involved, recognizing that holding onto anger would only harm himself and the empire. Holiday uses the metaphor of a fire, explaining how it consumes fuel to grow stronger. Similarly, adversity can fuel our growth and resilience. Holiday points out that this approach isn't just for emperors. He acknowledges that most of us won't face rebellions, but we will encounter obstacles in our own lives: business setbacks, market crashes, personal hurts, and people trying to hold us back. The key, he argues, is to view these obstacles not as roadblocks, but as opportunities. He uses examples from earlier in the book, like Rockefeller's calm demeanor under pressure and Demosthenes' dedication to overcoming his speech impediment, to show how others have successfully turned adversity into advantage. These individuals didn't avoid challenges. They leaned into them, using them as a chance to learn, grow, and become stronger. The author explains that the secret lies in 3 disciplines: perception, action, and will. First, we must see things as they truly are, without letting emotions cloud our judgment. Second, we must act correctly, doing what we can to address the situation. And finally, we must endure and accept what we cannot change. Holiday uses the Latin phrase, vires acquirit iundo. We gather strength as we go, to illustrate that this is a process, not an instant fix. It requires consistent practice and a willingness to learn from our experiences. Holiday concludes by reiterating that anyone can adopt this mindset. It doesn't require special training or innate talent, just a commitment to practicing these principles. By mastering these disciplines, we can transform obstacles into pathways to success, finding gratitude even in difficult times, and realizing that fate doesn't have to be a predetermined destiny, but a chance to exercise our freedom and shape our own lives. Ultimately, the author encourages readers to embrace the idea that the obstacle is the way, and to approach challenges with courage, resilience, and a belief in their own ability to overcome. And that brings us to the end of our summary of this book. I hope you found it insightful and valuable. If you enjoyed this video, hit like and subscribe for more. Your support helps us bring you more great content. Thanks for watching.